want to acknowledge that it's Veterans Day and to express gratitude for all those who have served our country, and in particular to remember two of my earliest teachers, both my grandfathers who served as well. My grandma and I have a tradition. Every fall and every spring as we head toward finals time, I call her up and I say, "Grandma, yell at me." And her response is, "Ariella, put down the newspaper, put down that book, stop reading your email, and do your homework." It's surprisingly effective. This was one of many reminders I had over the years to finish setting the table, to finish cleaning my room, and other things like that. Because sometimes I found it challenging to finish a task when there's so many other things that would demand my attention. And sometimes I just needed someone to snap me out of it. Today, I still sometimes find myself meandering away from that finish line for more sentimental reasons. When something is finished, it's gone. It's no longer my experience, and maybe wisdom might tell us otherwise, but it seems like it's gone forever. So when I'm reading a particularly good book, I often slow down as I approach the end, trying to prolong my experience in it. And when I'm involved in something really great, and it starts to approach the end, even though I'm aware there's nothing I can do about it, and that the next phase might just be just as transformative, as monumental as whatever I've just come from, I still do everything in my power, which is not much, to slow down time and to remain frozen in that moment. If I can feel that way with a book, imagine how I'm feeling right now, more than 10 years after walking into my first class in this building. With this sentimental mindset, maybe it's no wonder that I see something similar happening in Parashat Hayei. We're nearing a completion point in the narrative, and the action has slowed down significantly. God and Abraham have not interacted since the Akedah, since Yitzchak's near sacrifice on Mount Moriah. In the meantime, Sarah has died, and Abraham has negotiated a burial site for her. Abraham Zaken Ba Bayamim. Abraham is getting older, and he knows that he is approaching the end of his life as well. And Yitzchak has exhibited no agency, no readiness to step up and continue the story. Many Midrashim speak of Yitzchak himself existing in a dark, stagnant kind of place, mourning for his mother Sarah. The light, the comfort, the protection that enveloped her tent is now absent, only to be returned when Rivka enters his life and his mother's tent. Abraham is trying to continue the story himself by sending his servant to find Yitzchak a wife from his birthplace, from his family. In this tumultuous time of transition, perhaps this is when we would expect God to be most present and most involved, yet God is glaringly absent in this part of our narrative. Where's the conversation? Where's the closeness? Where's that relationship? Abraham's servant, before leaving on his sacred mission, calls out to God and says, "Vayomar, Adonai, Elohei Adoni Abraham, hakrena lefanai hayom, va'aseh chesed im Adoni Abraham." God of my master Abraham, grant me success on this day, and do kindness to my master Abraham. Midrash Bereshit Rabbah gives a fascinating read to this verse, making it not just a simple servant's prayer for success, but rather a wake-up call, a phone call by grandma to do the divine homework, if you will. It reads, Hitchalta, Gamor. You started something. Finish it. Rabbi Hayei said in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, Hakol tzrichin l'chesed. Everyone is in need of your divine support, God. You demonstrated this love to Abraham, so don't stop now. Hitchalta Gamor. You began something. See it completed. Finish what you started. Get the story moving again, and give Yitzchak what he needs to get out of this dark and stopped place. Perhaps God, too, isn't quite ready to let go of Abraham in his chapter of the story. By slowing down the action, by pulling back just a little bit, maybe this is God's way of saying, can't I just hold on to you a little bit longer? Heschel and King, among others, spoke of God not as Aristotle's unmoved mover, but as the most moved mover. God, through the divine relationship formed with humankind, is inspired to act for their sake in the world, in experiencing what Heschel describes as the fullness of God's care. God, too, is affected and becomes, quote, personally involved in and even stirred by the conduct and fate of men. At least according to this midrashic read of the text, God seems to be so moved that God actually can't do any moving. The The servant's task then is not just to find a wife for Yitzchak, but to jumpstart all of the players in this narrative. There's work to do. There's a nation to grow. And saying goodbye is an essential part of that growth. Yet sometimes, even in our best attempts at movement, we remain stuck. This chapter, the story of the servant's ultimately successful mission to find Yitzchak a wife, is the longest chapter in the Torah. It slows our arrival at Abraham's inevitable death and this transition that we come to of a story centered around Yitzchak. It's a very, very long goodbye. Maybe that's where we get it from. But there's more. We find opening the servant's plea to God on the word Bayomar, the cantillation mark known as the shalshelet. It's a trope that requires the word to be extended and chanted with notes that go up and down and up and down and up and down multiple times, willing us to stay just a little bit longer, beckoning us into that moment as the notes seem to go on forever. The shalshelet is motion in place. It draws us into the power of that moment and wills us to remain there, but we can't. Itchalta gomor. It's time not just to move, but to move forward. So the servant returns with Rivka, a figure that ultimately helps jumpstart the story with huge leaps and bounds. She is motion embodied. Vatmaher, Vatoret Kadal, Yadav, Vatashkehu. She hurried to fill her jug to give the servant water. Vatmaher, Vatar Kadal, Shoket Vataratz Od El Be'er Lishov. She hurried again, running down to the well over and over to fill up enough water for all the camels. Vataratz Ana'aral Vataged Laveti Ma. She ran again back home to tell her family about what happened at that well. Rivka is on the move, drawing water, that always flowing, never still essence of life for both the servants and the camels. This substance and its bearer teach us to go with the flow. She's the one who demonstrates kindness, worthy of the Abrahamic family, the one who will ultimately uproot herself and move to a new land and carry our narrative forward. When asked, Hatachi im ha'ish hazeh, will you go with this man? Will you go back to be Isaac's wife? She says, Elech, I will go. I will move. I will bring movement. I will shoulder the burden of this scary time of change and transition, of goodbyes, and help Yitzchak emerge on the other side of his own stuckness. Truthfully, I often find myself relating to the phenomenon of this narrative, wanting to stay steady, to remain in place, to hang on to a really good story as long as possible, perhaps no more acutely than right now. Heading into the unknown is scary for me, all the more so when leaving a place and a chapter in my life that has been so nourishing, so transformative, so safe, and so comfortable. Perhaps this resonates with some of you as well. Many of us get stuck at different points in our lives, whether in physical spaces, in different roles, in relationships. There's something about human nature that has us yearning to keep things as they are. We may find ourselves staying in a place that's bad for us for far too long, or even overstaying our welcome in places that are good for us because of this comfort of what is known. And sometimes we might just be in need of that voice on the phone telling us to put down those distractions and stop making those excuses and to do our self-work. It may require a paradigm shift, but there's great power in being Rivka, in being that mover, when we can get ourselves to that point. My family is very familiar with this phenomenon of being stuck. At times, my older brother, Danny, with his unique combination of disabilities, gets locked inside himself. He wants to get out of the car, he wants to put on his shoes, he wants to go to sleep, but he gets stuck, he can't. He's trapped, and he can't move forward into that next step. We often find ourselves scratching our heads, wondering, what does he need right now? What do we need to say to get him going again? We find ourselves facing that challenge of the fourth child that we read about in the Passover Haggadah. What do we do for that child, she'eino yodeh lish'ol, that child who does not know how to ask, that child who is stuck, who doesn't know how to participate, who can't figure out how to move forward? The answer? At patachlo, you literally open for that child. You make space for that individual to step forward and to engage and to be engaged. Because sometimes being stuck renders us voiceless. So we try with Dani to restore his voice, to open his mouth, sharing the schedule of the next few hours, something to look forward to in the future, redirection, but nothing's guaranteed to work every time. But when we do figure it out, that he just needed reassurance that he'd be going home at the end of an event, or that we just forgot a basic step in his routine. The result is magical. Every time Donnie gets unstuck, the look of relief and joy on his face says it all. And what it tells us is, you got me out of this. You understood my need. All I needed was this one small thing, and you stayed with me, you didn't give up, you figured it out, and now I can move forward. It's so simple sometimes to empower others to get unstuck, but often bigger challenges with ourselves, listening to those external voices that remind us to set aside those distractions, to let go of our fears of moving forward, and to know that we have work to do. It's time to listen to that voice, to heed that call, to move, and to be moved. So as much as I might like to stay, it's time to go. It's time to dig deep for that courage to say, Aleph, I will go. Of my own accord, as Rashi interprets Rivka's response. You can't stop me. As we shift into new phases, as we traverse liminal spaces, this responsibility remains constant. These words of Torah have called upon us to move. So let's together make waves. Let's set the world in motion. Let's find, in the process, the opportunity for ourselves to be most moved. Will you go to restore light and motion to those whose lives have been darkened and paused? Aleph, I will go. Aleph, let us go and draw that which brings nourishment to others. Aleph, let us go and hold the hands of others as they bravely face transition, even as we might face those same exact fears. Aleph, when we get stuck, let us listen to those voices who open for us the channel to go with the flow. Aleph, I will go and continue what I started, and maybe even finish my homework along the way. Kaddish Rabbanan.